Thank you. Welcome to the Parks, Arts, and Libraries and Education Subcommittee, PALE. Appreciate y'all being here. We're going to rise for the pledge. Please join us. Councilwoman, if you would.
Of course. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. So, somebody want to move the minutes? Oh, call to the public, and we don't have any, right? Somebody want to move the minutes?
Chair, I'd like to approve the minutes of the last meeting on June 27th.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Fantastic. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. So we have consent, but I know we have a card on number 2. So do we have a presentation or anything? Is Jerry here? I saw him. Oh, I'm sorry, Jerry. Would you like to come on up? And we'll play off of you. How about that?
Okay. We'll play off of you. You're happy to see me. I'm happy to see you. It's been since June.
It might be slightly overstated on both counts, but you know.
Right.
Sorry.
I was afraid the subcommittee.
Full fun at a citizen's expense.
I was afraid the subcommittee had disbanded. And there goes our forum. But I do have my ubiquitous handouts, which I'll give to Penny. Yeah, as far as redesignating Camelback as a preserve and from the status of a park, most everybody considers it a preserve or worthy of preservation. So we have no problem with that. The public, as long as the mountain's there, that's their big concern. But going forward, the expenses, the maintenance, any improvements such as the Choya Trail, that money's going to come out of Parks and Preserve Initiative funds, most of it. And, it's been 19 years now that fund's been in existence, and we've never really had a designated person overseeing that fund. $500 million have been spent from that fund. There's over $30 million a year coming into it, which is as much as plenty, some of these departments. So we think, and we've got 3 attorneys working, 2 public interest attorneys that deal with public initiatives, working on a proposal to go out and hire a public, someone to manage this public fund. And we'll be getting that to everybody, all the council and city staff before the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Somebody want to
Mr.
move item
Chair?
2 unless there's something else? Oh, yes.
I'd like to move the 2 consent items, item number 2 and 3.
Okay. I assume we can move them together. Fantastic.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes appear to have it. Do have it so ordered. Thank you. Are you guys doing this on presentations? Fantastic. We have several items for information. Councilman, I see your hand.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd like to, do we have, it's just information, okay, never mind. I was going to approve it.
Isn't that what I just said? Yes, that's what we're doing. So we're good. All right. That takes us to item 11. Hi, guys. What do you have for us today?
Hi, Vice Mayor and members of the subcommittee. We have 2 public art items we want to present to you today. Ed Lebo is our public art director, and he will lead you through the presentation.
Is this going to be 11 and 12 together?
Yes, we will take 11 and 12
Fantastic.
together.
Good morning, Vice Mayor and members of the council. These would be the 4th and 5th enhancement projects for community well sites. This is a partnership with the Water Department, but it also is an involvement with neighborhood services, police department for safety, community organizations, and the like. And the entire effort is to improve 2 well sites in this request. One is well site number 225. It's at 44th Street and Beverly Lane in District 2. And the other is the well site 156, which is 62nd Avenue and Osborne Road. It's right on the edge of District 7 and also District 5. And I'll walk you through a little bit of history on these projects. This is the first project, just for context, that we accomplished in the last year with Water, NSD, Police. This was the site at 55th and Edgemont. It's the original condition, and as you can see, some of these well sites are vacant lots with equipment, but in residential neighborhoods. They're exposed, they're hot, and anything that we can do to be better neighbors and bring in more trees and reduce the temperature, all the better. This is what the artist Kevin Berry, who's from right here in Phoenix, designed in conjunction with a landscape architect, Janet Weibel, and also with heavy involvement from the community, because each of these sites is different, and we expect each of these sites will look different according to the wishes of the community. And this community wanted a centerpiece, and they also wanted some fencing. And this was the result. This was the dedication in September of just this past year, a vast improvement over what that site had been. So this is what these projects can accomplish. There are two other projects in motion right now. One is at 6th Street and Butler in Sunny Slope in District 6. And takes this vacant lot that you see on the left and will transform it into what you see on the right. And that's in construction right now. The second site, or the third site that is already in design, is out at 73rd Avenue in Crittenden. And as you can see, it's a very large vacant lot. We've learned in walking around with a heat gun that some of these vacant lots can be about 164 degrees on a 108-degree day. And there are a lot of kids that walk down these sidewalks, so anything we can do to bring more shade to these neighborhoods could help bring down the heat imprint, and that's an important part of these projects as well. So the first request that we have is for artist Mary Schindel, up to $35,000. Both of these artists that we've come to you today with this request came from a pool of 88 artists who responded to requests for qualifications. That pool was narrowed to 6 finalists. They were all interviewed, or 5 of them were. One had backed out of the project due to scheduling conflicts, but the 5 artists were interviewed. Mary was at the top of the list. And this is the site. It's Beverly Lane, 44th Street. We had a community member from this neighborhood involved in this. It's 2 parcels, really. It's an enclosed area where there's a lot of water equipment. These are inactive well sites. But then there's also this wide area that has some trees. We don't know what the design will be, but that will come out of the involvement of the community, the landscape architect, and the artist if this project is approved and moved ahead. As you can see, pretty bare sidewalks. The community members shared with us that there are a lot of school kids that come down this sidewalk. So again, anything we can do to add shade to this mix is better for the community. Mary was recommended because of the quality of her past work. This is a project she had done for Valley Metro in Mesa. It was a community that really loved the pecan trees that were historic to the area. And Mary has a great hand with nature and developing durable works in steel and quite beautiful works. This is up along 19th Avenue as part of the light rail corridor in the city of Phoenix. And so this is another piece that Mary had done as part of a fairly large park, community park in Goodyear. She was recommended because of the durability of her work, her responsiveness in working with communities, and also her ability to maybe come up with something new and sort of wonderful for the community up there in District 2. So that's the first request from Mary Schindel, up to $35,000 to carry out this project. The second artist recommended was a gentleman named Jeff Zischke. These are both Arizona artists. Again, $35,000. This is the site at 62nd and Osborne. You can see it's right on a corner. And it is quite bare. It has some equipment in there, and there are some, I think, improvements in the way of fencing and also security that can help this. But also, when you look at the street itself, it's very hot. You have hardscape and then other hardscape next to gravel. And so again, we hope that out of this project and working with the community, it'd be great to add trees and bring in some other things that the community might like. Jeff was recommended because of, one, the durability and beauty of his work. He has a great hand in sort of interpreting natural forms. This is for Cavalier Park in Scottsdale. They're quite lovely sort of interpretations of nature and pods. And then he also has done some large-scale works. This one's at Westworld in Scottsdale. And again, he and Mary both were recommended as a result of their ability to work in a wide range of media, but also very durable media, and also work well with communities as part of their projects. This one, this shade project, which will open shortly in Chandler, was also something that caught the eye of the panel, and they had a great discussion about this. So those are the requests. I'm happy to answer any questions about these projects. But again, these would be the 4th and 5th projects in motion to enhance the community well sites citywide.
Any questions?
I just have some
Yes,
comments.
please.
I had the opportunity to visit the community center, well, Trevor Brown High School, where we talked about the well site in Maryville, and the only complaint we heard was that it wasn't moving quickly enough. The community was very excited about it. It looked beautiful, and I think it would definitely be an amazing asset, especially I'm really passionate about having more shade in that area particularly, so I thought it looked beautiful. So the artist the sketches we saw were amazing, and everyone was really happy with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael?
Vice Mayor, I just want to make sure that there are a handful of individuals that we can maybe through both of our districts recommend individuals for input to making sure that the community feels that they have a vested interest in this.
If we can, Councilman, we'll work directly with your office on any recommendations and getting the word out once these projects begin, if they're approved.
All right, no, absolutely. That'd be both of our offices, yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, thank you.
So how would citizens watching this at home, one of the areas you mentioned, the 44th and Beverly, is right down the street from my old house, so I know it well, obviously in District 2. It's a pristine, as all the neighborhoods are in District 2, but it's a pristine neighborhood that has sort of an ugly gash in it, frankly. It's necessary, but obviously beautifying something that's kind of always stood out as out of place in that neighborhood is appreciated. So if citizens, you already got one who's providing input, how would other citizens do the same? How would they get involved if they wanted to?
So if this is approved, we would expect to have a kickoff meeting in the community, and we'd want to work through your office to make sure we got word out to all the neighborhoods that are involved in this, so that there would be a public meeting where the community can meet with the artist and the landscape architect, and frankly tell them and us how they would like to see this space used. Some communities want the spaces to be more active, others less active. And that would be a key question for the neighborhood. So if it's all right with you, we'd like to work through your office to make sure we get the word out. And
I think that was Councilman Nowakowski's point as well. I wasn't speaking specifically about just the project in my district, but I think all of us would like to weigh in on these things. You can't make people avail themselves of these opportunities, but you got to provide the opportunity. How quickly, so we're voting on this today, like what would be the timetable going forward to Vanya's point about people want things to move faster?
if this is approved today, we'll take this to City Council in, I think it's December 12th. And then we would work with everyone involved on sort of the contracting side to get artists and landscape architects under contract so we could begin thinking about design January, February timeframe. That would be the kickoff for it. Then the design we foresee taking place over about 6 months, from January through June, and perhaps looking for funding and then construction in the following year.
So where, like, do you use city facilities for these meetings? Or in this case, there's a community center not far away. Do you ever consider if people are willing to host? Maybe that's awkward with liability concerns and so forth, this official city meeting. But if you get too far away, then it suppresses turnout. How many people are going to go to the meeting? And not every neighborhood is, a mile or so away from a community center.
Well, we often ask the community members who've been involved what they recommend in the way of good places to meet and what's convenient for everyone. And your office probably all of your offices have insights about what good sites are. We meet at just about in a wide range of places. For the Sunny Slope project, we met at a commercial establishment.
I was going to say, so it could be Starbucks or something like that. It does not have to be a city facility if something is not.
Really, whatever is convenient and accessible to all.
Yeah, and exactly, because you're limiting, if people don't drive, or you're now limiting it if they don't have a way to get to the meeting. So how are you going to let people know about the meetings? Is that
Well,
door hangers or?
We often work through water, and they have an outreach arm that assists, but we'll want to work through your offices as well to make sure the word gets out.
Yeah, you just don't want people to survive. I mean, there are people who literally live right next. I'm sure it's probably the case in a lot of these, but in that particular neighborhood, I mean, they're right there across the street. It's definitely going to impact them. You just don't want somebody who lives, has lived there for 20 years, and that's kind of the way that neighborhood is, who's in like, what are they doing behind, I don't want to get that call 2 years from now, so, or whenever it is it's actually being built. So,
Vice Mayor,
you want at least, you can't make people go, but you want to make sure that they're aware of what's happening, and that's trickier because you can't make people open the doors. You don't have phone numbers necessarily for every single person, et cetera. So I'm glad the water department, who does know how to track these folks down for billing purposes, is on. Any other questions? Okay,
So motion to approve items number 11 and 12.
thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes appear to have it. Do have it so ordered. Thank you. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Inger?
Good morning, Vice Mayor Waring and members of the subcommittee. Today, we're here to talk about park development and improvements in the City of Phoenix Parks and Recreation Department. As you may remember, we have about 47,000 acres in parkland, about 180 parks, 200 miles of trails, 29 public pools, 6 municipal golf courses, 27 community centers, and many specialty areas such as Heritage Square, Pueblo Grande Museum, and the Japanese Friendship Garden, just to name a few. A little bit of history on the largest source of funding that we have for parks development and improvements for the Parks and Recreation Department. In again, a reminder about the history of how we got this fund. In 1999, the voters approved a 1/10 of a cent sales tax for 10 years. The first 10 years, 60% went to preserves, 40% went for purchase, improvement, and renovations of facilities, including 9 regional parks. In 2008, the tax was reauthorized by 83% of the voters, and the split was shifted. It went 60% for parks and 40% for the preserves, but it also allowed now for maintenance and operation expenses to be charged to this revenue stream as well, in the new language. Since the inception in 1999, about $510 million have been spent citywide on things like improvements, land acquisition, and maintenance and operation expenses. So this chart gives you for the purposes of this report, we divided the city into 2 halves, and there's some maps on your tables to kind of see it more visually, and then we'll get to some maps later on in the presentation as well. But we took Northern as the dividing point, and we put north of Northern and south of Northern. So you can see the comparison of types of facilities that we have in the Parks and Recreation system that are located either south or north of Northern. Many of them are larger amounts in the south, primarily because of the way the city grew up. But as you can see, preserve acreage is very, very, very close. And we'll talk more about specific categories as we go through in the presentation here. So to visualize it a little bit deeper, these are some pictures of some of the facilities that are north of Northern. Cortez Pool, Reach 11, which has not only trails, natural areas and trails, but soccer and baseball facilities, and then Cesar Chavez Golf Course as well. And so again, these are the numbers you saw on the chart previously: 34 neighborhood parks, 19 community parks, 6 district parks, 1 golf course, community centers, community pools. Some of the projects that have happened because of the Parks Preserve Initiative funds over the last 5 years, and we just took a 5-year snapshot of the projects in the Flatland Parks: Sunrise Playground, Pinnacle Dog Park, which is just now in the process of being completed, Paseo Highland Pickleball Courts, and there was a total of 56 projects in the last 5 years, just over $29 million spent on those projects. The interesting note on this is the average per project, and again, some were small, some were large, so but the average is about $522,000 per project if you took it an average. Examples south of Northern. You have Mahatak Park and Nueve Park are two good examples. We have 49 neighborhood parks, 29 community parks, 9 district parks, golf courses. The majority of golf courses are in the south part of past Northern, 21 centers, and 21 community pools. Again, primarily because of the way the city grew up in the central and then expanded out towards the outskirts of north and south. Some examples of projects in the last 5 years south of Northern: just recently completed Desert West Community Center, some infrastructure improvements, Mariposa Playground, and Willow Park. There were 133 projects and $51 million, but again, when you divide that out, it's only $384,000 per project. Again, some smaller ones, maybe some sidewalk improvements, a playground, those types of things. So, but on average, there's more projects, but again, the projects might have been smaller in scale. As it relates to the preserves, Parks Preserve Initiative funds have actually been spent more in the north part of town, primarily because we've acquired more preserves recently. You know, the main preserve in south part of Phoenix is really South Mountain, and we've had that for nearly 100 years. But you can see the amount of trailhead entry points, both trailheads and walk-in areas are much larger in the north part of town, and I think, again, that's primarily because as we've developed new trails and new preserves, we've been able to learn from what we have done in the past down south. So these are the maps that I know that are a little bit maybe hard to see, but you've got them also on your table there. District parks. District Park is a facility that's up to 85 acres. The service area is about 5 miles. You're serving about 75,000 to 100,000 people, and it could include things like golf courses, festival areas, or swimming pools. And some good examples are Cesar Chavez Park and Paradise Valley Park. Those are two good examples of district and region parks. And so there are 5 that are in the north part of town, and there are 7 south of Northern. Community parks, they serve an area of about 1.5 miles, and about 20 to 75,000 people is what we hope are in that circumference around the park that would have access to this particular park, or this type of park. Usually they're 40 acres in size. They're active recreation amenities like lighted sports fields, dog parks, and restrooms. And you can see there's 40 of those in our park system. And again, 16 are north of Northern, 24 are south of Northern. So I categorize these all together because they're the smaller versions of parks, and there were so many of them to mention. That there's obviously 49 neighborhood parks in the south of Northern area, and 34, and so there's too many to list on the actual slide here. But some good examples of those types of parks are Sumaida and Dynamite, as far as the neighborhood parks, and University and Solano. And then mini parks. The mini parks are really generally either 1 lot size, possibly 2 lot size. A lot of them are in the south part of Phoenix, and again, primarily because in the neighborhoods they were put, there was a vacant lot, and we took that lot and made it into a mini park for the community. Those are meant to be walked to. They generally just have a playground and not a lot of amenities, but they're mainly meant for the community that is in that surrounding area. Natural areas, a good example of a desert park would be Papago Park, and some good examples of the mountain preserves are obviously down south. Phoenix Mountain Preserves, which kind of straddles the northern border that we've been talking about, and then the Phoenix Sonoran Preserve, which is way to the north. Again, the acreages are pretty close in number, 17,000 and some change up in north, and then 18,000 in south. And there's, again, 74 entry points in the north part, 36 in the south. Community centers. I've broken these down into small and large. Small community centers would be a big open room and maybe 1 classroom, but not a lot of other amenities, and it's meant for the community to walk to and have a safe place to be. You'll see a lot of them are really located in the central part of Phoenix, and again, kind of the way the city grew. Many times the smaller centers were what we built many years ago. We haven't been building small centers. We've been building more like community centers that are multi-generational and serve all ages. The smaller centers generally serve the teens and the younger kids. The large centers usually have things like gymnasium, weight equipment, things of that nature in them. And again, there are 2 small in the north and 14 small south, and 5 large in the north and 6 large in the south. Pool facilities, you can see again a high concentration in the central part of Phoenix. Again, many of those are 60, 70 years old, and they're smaller in nature. Cortez was the most recent pool that we renovated and made it more of into a facility that all ages would want to come to versus just a box kind of a pool. And again, you have 10 in the north, 8 in the north and 21 in the south, and you can see where they're located. Tennis facilities, I know this was of particular interest. We do have 2 facilities that are pay to play. The rest of them are drop-in. You can go anytime that the park is open. The 2 that are pay to play are Phoenix Tennis Center, which has more than 20 courts, and then Mountain View, which has 6 courts. And you can see Phoenix Tennis Center is right there close to the northern border, but it is south of Northern, and then Mountain View is up in the north part of town. Golf courses, we have 6 golf courses, even though 2 of the golf courses have 2 different sets of holes, 18 and 9, but for the purposes of locations, we have 6 locations. 2 of them are managed by other organizations for us, but the golf courses are primarily south of Northern, and Cave Creek is the one that is north of Northern. And the last slide I have as far as maps is undeveloped parks, and we have quite a few. We have 12 that are north of Northern, and we have 17 south of Northern. And primarily these have stayed vacant for a period of time because we don't have operating funds to operate them. We might be able to build them, but then the ongoing operating cost is there for forever. And until we're able to find the way to fund those, that's one of the challenges we have for developing some of those parks that have signs in them that say future park. So as you can see, we have a very diverse type of facilities. The types of improvements and development we've had is depending on the type of facility, it's pretty equal across the city, but some of them were created back many, many years ago, and as the city's expanded, the type of facilities have changed, like the types of pools have changed. People don't want the box pools anymore. They want more of a play pool type of a situation. So as the city continues to develop and grow, we also continue to develop and grow. And with that, I'd answer any questions.
Thank you. First, you guys have any questions? Michael? All right, so I've been on the council a while, not as long as Michael. But so maybe he has a presentation of this, but I don't recall ever getting sort of this laid out to this level of detail, and I appreciate you doing it. That's part of the reason I wanted to do this exercise as chairman of this committee. So I appreciate this map very much. Yes, it's busy, but you know, I think it gives you good detail too, and it's certainly useful, I think, for our offices. But then this breakdown, I think, illustrates one point I was going to make, that north of Northern is getting short shrift. If you could put up the parallel sets of numbers you had, I think it might be in the first
Very
slide.
beginning, yeah.
It had a brown background. Sorry.
Back to the beginning. Oh, there it is.
Oh,
There you go.
blue, the terrible witness in court. So north seems to be coming up short on sort of everything. Preserve acreage is mostly equal, to your point. You know, one sort of straddles north and south. It's right there on Northern, and that's fine. You know, the reason I think, you know, you're seeing the total project cost is because we're buying preserve, which is now, if you look at this map, the bigger map that's got kind of the green areas highlighted. You know, I think realistically, if you're going to balance, if I'm not saying the goal is to balance out, you buy preserve land where there's places preserved that makes sense. So, but you know, because you're spending a lot of money on that particular endeavor, which has got things kind of up to parity, and so we do have more trailheads. But other than that, I mean, there is a pretty large disparity in almost every number on that chart. And I have to explain this to my constituents. You and I meet all the time trying to like cobble together funds for dog parks and stuff, and you've done a fantastic job of doing that. But for someone in Tatum Ranch, and for those who aren't familiar, you know, so you're almost at the Cave Creek Carefree border, basically, you're a long way from a golf course. You're a long way from our tennis centers. I mean, it's quite a drive before you get to anything that even looks remotely like somewhere you could take your kids, which our park system, to my mind, I know obviously adults use it too. I'm an adult. I go to our park systems, and Scottsdale's too, because I live on the border. But it is hard to explain to parents, well, I want to take my kids to use a jungle gym, and you've got this big sign saying undeveloped park coming soon. The sign's been there for years since the downturn, because we've had that happen. But you could take them on a trail. Yeah, with littler kids, that's great, but it's kind of out of alignment on just about everything else. One does not necessarily substitute for the other. At a time where we're trying to get people to drive less and so forth, obviously we're incentivizing people to drive all the way downtown or to drive considerable distances to get to a park so they can then get some exercise. Because if you look at really any of these maps, a lot of people in the northern part of the district, mostly myself and Mayor Williams' districts, you're a long way from a lot of these facilities. And so that's been a little bit of a source of frustration. I suspected I'd find what I think almost each one of these charts finds. The one thing we excel at is undeveloped parks. So, and that's come up with people who are like, yeah, I bought this house up here. When is this park that we felt like we were promised going to come in? It's not all negative. Obviously, we've got nice facilities. I emphasize tennis, for example, because I play tennis. I don't really go swim. I got my own pool, but I like tennis. I had to get on the city council to even know that we had a tennis center, and that the council, before my time on the council, had authorized $4 million to spruce it up. It's a beautiful facility. I think I played there once. But I don't know if you're really going to drive there from Tatum Ranch or Desert Ridge or Tremonto or something like that, because it's just a real big hall, unless there's some tournament or something you're playing at. So it's not just where the facilities are located, but the concentration doesn't make them necessarily. It's great that we got 20 courts there, but if you only got 5 courts for a whole district, that's a little bit of an issue too. I think it's more than that. We've got some right down the street from my house at Sweetwater, but again, that's a long way from the Carefree Highway, which is the border. Again, I'm probably talking too much strictly about my area, but obviously it's the area I know best. I would also note, if you look at this chart, the south part of the city has one thing in it, downtown, where almost nobody lives. We talk about trying to get people to go downtown. We spend a lot of infrastructure on downtown, but 1% of Phoenix's population, roughly 16,000 people, lives downtown, where each of our districts, we got 8 districts, we got roughly 1.6 million people. Do the math, a district has 200,000 people. So some of this area to the south, where we're putting stuff, is places where people don't actually live. So again, you're incentivizing driving, which is not, to my mind, what we want to be doing. I'm not saying move existing facilities, but it'd be nice if the facilities sort of tracked a little bit with where the people are actually habitating and can get to relatively easily. I think hopefully what I'm saying is sort of broadly stating the complaints I hear from constituents. That park you're talking about, if I live in Tatum Ranch and you're saying, well, you could just go to Desert Ridge, those aren't really the same thing, and they're not right next door to each other, and now it's kind of a drive, but you've got 3 facilities or whatever on any of these charts that are fairly easy drive. Unfortunately, you're kind of directing people to places where there aren't as many people, if that makes sense. So I guess I just wanted some thoughts about, we could go through each of these charts. I think each one with the handy northern dividing line sort of illustrates the point. And I'm just curious, what can we do about that? How can we make these changes? Or at least some changes to redirect resources to reach the newer populations?
So Vice Mayor Waring and members of the subcommittee, I think a lot of these facilities existed. We haven't really built a lot of new facilities in the last 10 years. In fact, the newest facility we have built probably is the Pinnacle Dog Park, and then we're going to be building some soccer fields in that same area right up there in Reach 11. And that was a response to the community.
Yeah, because they didn't have anything before.
Correct.
So
Correct. And so I think
there's a lot of people. Like I said, 200,000 people. So.
Absolutely. So I think, continuing to have conversations about how we can continue to fund the ongoing operation and maintenance of the facility, because generally it's not difficult to build a facility, it's the ongoing operation and maintenance. And so a smaller, like a neighborhood park, would be about $300,000 a year maybe to operate and maintain that. And so if we can get the funds to continue to do that, That's one of the things. We've partnered most recently with a school in the south part of Phoenix to have them build the park that we couldn't build and maintain. They're going to maintain it. So we've got an IGA that was approved by the council several months ago. And if we can partner with other groups that might be able to help us with the operation and maintenance, that's another way that I think we can get some of these things accomplished and built. You know, working with groups that might have the ability to have that continuing, ongoing maintenance and operation. Cashman Park is a good example in your area, where the community wanted certain things which we didn't have the funds available, and they went out and they provided the funds. And so working together, I think we can accomplish some of these things. It's just a matter of finding that ongoing source of funds that will continue it on perpetually forever.
And I'm obviously very familiar with that particular park. I guess, you know, is there for the dedication, beautiful facility. But for the older parks, or in the southern part or central part of the city, I mean, were neighborhoods expected back in the day, whenever they were built, to be chipping in too, and more than chipping in cash? I mean, you know, those folks are out of pocket. They're paying taxes, but then they're also out of pocket because they want stuff that other places already have throughout the city. I can understand their frustration. I feel it too. As you drive by, you're like, well, did they have to do that? I mean, was that a pretty standard practice back in the day?
No, Vice Mayor Waring, it wasn't. But what we do have currently is some of those small community centers that I was mentioning in the south part of town. Most of them are run by nonprofits because we closed them. And so the nonprofit groups came together and helped us reopen those. And so many of those would be shuttered today, with the exception of people coming forward and saying, you know what, we think that this community still needs that facility, and so we're going to step forward. A good example is the Victoria Foundation at Harmon Park, and Friendly House at Central Park. Those facilities would have been closed, but people stepped forward to operate them. So even though the community that's organized isn't necessarily one stepping forward, the community members are stepping forward, and they're actually paying to operate those facilities. And they pay for all the staffing, they pay for all the operations, they pay a percentage of the utilities, because the utilities would be there regardless if we were open or closed, and they pay a percentage, and they graduate eventually up to be 100% of the utilities for those facilities. So I think they are paying their part in a different way in some of those communities in the central part of town. It just happened to be those were developed many, many years ago. I mean, Grant Park is what I meant to say, Grant Park. Grant Park was built in the 40s, and that facility didn't have air conditioning until last year. And so, you know, I think they struggled for a long, long time without an amenity that most people would say was acceptable. We would probably have had some issues if it was in a different part of town, but they loved it. They had their swamp cooler. We finally got air conditioning, and now it's a better place to be in the summertime because it's actually bearable.
I was looking at the flip to the page that has the community centers. You know, it's got the small centers. Again, there are fewer centers up north. You know, and it's just, again, it's hard to sort of explain. Well, you could have one of our abandoned centers if you're willing to, you know, pay for it, when there are a lot more centers, again, to the south. It's just, it's an inequitable distribution of resources. You know, one of my bugaboos, people are painfully aware, is the golf courses. What was it, 15, 16 million? It was taken out of the preserve fund to pay off the debt. So taxpayers in my area are paying for that, or the area I represent, I should say, are paying for that, but they actually don't even have, I mean, there's one golf course that's anywhere even close. So I don't know how many people, again, from the northern, certainly the northern part of my district, but just in general, are gonna drive, Cape Creek, I think would be the closest, for the courses that was money that might have gone for the local parks that they're now not getting, because that was $15, $16 million, which can buy a fair amount of park, for a golf course they're not going to drive to because they're too far away. I mean, they'd be driving past a bunch of courses to get to the city course. And frankly, the way it works out fee-wise, if you cut a good deal, as my dad often reminds me, you can pay about the same to play on a private course as a city course. So it just is a business model that wouldn't make sense. Again, I feel like it's kind of a double whammy. Not only do we not have courses, not that I'm hankering for one, in our area, but then money that would have gone for parks in our area was spent to shore up the financially failing courses that are never going to get played by people in my area. And there'll be a few people who will write me and say, I play it, but it's certainly not 200,000 people. Felt the same way about light rail, 19th Avenue. You know, police resources were redirected over to 19th Avenue. So not only is there, not that we're, again, hankering for it, but there's no light rail coming anywhere even close to the district now, but there wasn't before either, that would be practical for people unless they want to drive a long distance. So you're taking sort of a sliver of a police officer, redirecting it for something that people in my area aren't going to use, but they still have to pay taxes for it. It's just, it's kind of a crazy setup. And at some point I wanted to at least highlight that. I think, at least to my satisfaction, the unfairness of this is highlighted. I should add, this is in no way your fault. I understand the financial constraints that you're under. I'm just pointing out that if you spend $4 million on a tennis facility at you know, Glendale and 19th Avenue, isn't about where it is,
It's up there.
that doesn't really do a large swath of the city any good. And again, I play tennis. I play with guys who play all the time, way better than me. They play in tournaments and stuff. It was only by happenstance I even found out that there was. I was like, what are you guys even talking about? I think it was about the time I got elected, probably right after. And they're like, oh, Phoenix has a tennis facility. I'm like, okay, that's great. They don't live in my district. But, you know, I found that kind of fascinating. I wonder how many other citizens who might want to play have no idea. They're not driving by it. I mean, it's kind of hidden in a neighborhood. Why would they even think about that? Same with city pools and so forth. So I definitely feel the frustration of the people in the newer areas of town. I feel like they're subsidizing stuff that just as a practical matter they're not going to use. And when I look at like basin parks, so we have a fair number of basin parks, but those aren't outfitted with the same stuff that one of the bigger parks is, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it might be a nice place to sort of run around and everything, but
Vice Mayor Waring and members of the subcommittee, Basin Park really is a dual purpose. It holds water. In the at Grover's and Cave Creek
Yeah,
Road.
it's for runoff
We've put
and
a
everything.
dog park in there, so we found a way to use it. But generally, people might play a pickup game of soccer or something like that in it. But the things that you want to stay high and dry have to
Right.
be out of the
yeah, it's
out
not
of the
Central
basin.
Park. It's not, you know, a bright shining light of the city. It's nice to have because it's, you know, not
It's good open
asphalt and so
space.
forth. But exactly. How much does it cost to build like a tennis court or a basketball court? I know soccer is about $1 million, right? And then you mentioned the maintenance.
Yeah. So
And how much is tennis and basketball?
So tennis courts, you know, could be 200,000 and on up, depending on if you want lights or if you don't want lights,
Right.
depending on what time of the year you want to use it or the time of the day. But you know, if you want to cobble a couple together, then you're looking at, you know, $800,000 if you want to put 4 together, right? And so there's economy of scales when you put multiple ones together, and generally people in a community, one tennis court, you go there and it's being used and you can't play anyway, so you want to put 2 or 3 there. Tennis is really something that's kind of not
Right.
as on the rise as maybe pickleball.
And I'm not saying it should be
Yeah.
a priority. I'm just saying, you know, if you're going to have it, spread it out.
Sure.
Basketball, I'd assume, would get used.
Generally most parks, with the exception of mini parks and even mini parks, have basketball hoops.
How much is that to put together?
You know, we could probably do one for $50,000, you know. So, and again, a standalone basketball is probably pretty good, but you'd probably put 2 there in some of the bigger areas. If it's a neighborhood park, you might just put 1. Mini parks, they usually have a very small, maybe even a half court, but they have a basketball hoop there in the park.
Yeah, and I just, again, that would be more of a kid-centric activity, the jungle gyms and everything, and those things are expensive, and you do have to maintain them, but I do assume it's a lot cheaper to maintain that stuff than it is a soccer field, which is grass. And
Absolutely.
obviously gets chewed up, and you got to at least kind of rotate it a little bit or it'll just be gone pretty quickly. I don't know, I've been talking a lot. Anybody, Michael, do you have a question?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Vice Mayor, for bringing this up. We've been talking about this for years now. My district has a little bit of everything. We have the downtown, we have some new development, some older neighborhoods, rich, poor, everything in between. One of the biggest concerns we have out in the Levine and Estrella Mountain is that we have all these future parks, but at the same time, we also have new development that has their own parks within their homeowners association. So why build a public park when you have neighborhood parks that are being maintained by their homeowners associations? So that was one of the debates that we're having, is that why is the city wasting money when there's parks already there? And then what are we going to do with these parks properties that we've purchased or we used at impact fees as a trade-off and stuff? Then I see that same situation probably happening in the northern part of town also. So one of the things that we looked at and we started the conversation, but maybe we can put a plan together, is how can we create more of these district or regional parks where you have them strategically planted throughout the city. Right now, it's kind of split evenly. You have 6 and 6 on 6 of them north of Northern and 6 of them south of Northern. So I think that if we, in the future, would be these district parks where you have a library, if it's a swimming pool or splash zone, soccer fields, baseball fields, tennis courts and all that, and within a 5-mile radius, I'm not sure, I'm just throwing that out, from individuals. And then you can have full service happening, and where people want to come for programs and all that, you can actually do this at these regional or district parks, and maybe not having these future parks being brought up. The other thing too is that we really need to look at the pools, making sure that they're spread out, and maybe there might be a need to close some of those pools and create these district or regional areas where you have these full services and we can actually provide good service. That a lot of times we're getting complaint that about 10 years ago we cut most of our little league baseball, soccer, and all kinds of sports and passed them on to community organizations to handle that. But at one time the city used to have all these leagues and stuff. That's when we had staff to actually staff them. The other big concern is the lack of soccer fields and all that in the south side of town, where we have Reach 11, but we don't have something on this side like a Reach 11 in the south Phoenix or even on the west side, except for Desert West, that we actually have, what is 4 or 6? 4 soccer fields. So for big tournaments that are becoming very popular now, people would have to use the West Sports Complex that's not even owned by the city of Phoenix, and there's about 20 soccer fields out there. So I think that we really need to sit down and come up with a plan for what we're going to do, or maybe create some kind of a matrix looking at what we have now and what we should be doing in the future. And my personal opinion is having these regional parks and having it fully staffed with all the services, full-blown services, and that if our staff can reach out to these little neighborhood parks from those regional parks, that might be a solution. But I would love to have it as a future agenda item where we start looking at how can we, even the golf courses, how do you spread those around to make sure that we don't have too many, or we don't have enough. And when it comes to tennis courts, in the west side of town, Maryville, they're converting some of those tennis courts into these little mini soccer courts because there's not a need for, the need is more soccer than it is tennis. So how do we develop programs and parks that fit the character of that neighborhood, and in the future if the character changes too, right? At one time Maryville was hot for tennis, and now it's more soccer, and we're converting those. So I think we need to have a master plan for the future growth of our parks and our existing parks, and also with our land that we own for future parks. If we should hold on to them, or if we should sell them and maybe develop more of these regional parks. I know that Cesar Chavez is something that has been a thorn on my side ever since I've been in office, because people from that Lavina straight up mountain area are saying that they really want to have a full-blown regional district park.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. Yes, we can definitely have more discussion about this. So I guess I would say, I assume the audience at home, I know the people here can see, we still have the same chart up. If you look down at the bottom, total projects, 133 are in the southern part of the city, 56 are in the northern part. Total cost, $51 million in the south, $29 million in the north. That's a pretty pretty wide disparity. I sort of know where the districts are, so I know, we have to, every district has to be the same size, at least after the last census. So, you're talking about a pretty balanced makeup of the population. As judged by the census, it might go a little further than northern, but that's probably also changing, except for Michael's area. There's growth up to north and then in some of his area, but the rest of it's pretty static. So I'm not in any way suggesting you need to build more tennis courts or certainly golf courses. I think we should be out of that.
Right.
Or pools or anything. I'd say, okay, houses in District 2, 3, and 1, probably 80% have a pool. I think that's probably a fair, generally speaking. So do we need pools? Maybe the older neighborhoods that made sense because there weren't pools at houses. Okay, not saying everybody has a pool, but obviously maybe a disproportionate share. So maybe the 8 pools in the north to the 21 in the south makes sense when you factor in, there's more need for it in the southern part of the city. I don't know, but that's possible. That might be at least an explanation. The golf courses obviously are expensive. Like I said, quite a bit of revenue was swept by the council to shore up the golf courses. So that's a disparity that, when do we get that 15 million back? Because that doesn't seem particularly fair to me. Undeveloped parks, again, we have fewer undeveloped parks, but we have way fewer facilities, less than half, just to begin with. So I'm not wedded to any one kind of thing. If it's not tennis, then could we have more jungle gyms or something, or parks that have that kind of stuff? Because really, again, for me, as a fiduciary of the city, trying to divvy up resources, I look at this as kids first, even though I recognize, including myself, that I want to play, but the idea is to get kids outside, kids running around, kids places to burn off energy. To me, that is priority number one. And I recognize what Michael's saying. Sometimes we, have new developments. We just authorized one in my district that, okay, they're going to build a park. But a lot of it's either, a gated area, so that's great for the people in that community. And that sometimes comes up, the neighbors across the street will say, okay, we'll be okay with this as long as you give us access to the park you're building, because otherwise that doesn't do us any good. Just by virtue of having it, unless there's access to it, that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Not every neighborhood has that. You and I have talked about this with citizens before. Soccer fields, that's kind of a big thing. They are expensive, so I recognize the problem there. Again, for the money that was redirected on a golf course, you could build 15 soccer fields. To your point, though, you got to maintain them. But at some point, this disparity is pretty glaring, and I would like to have a discussion. Reach 11, yes, that's up in the northern part, but that's not accessible to the public 24/7. That's more for concentrated activities and stuff, and that's come up too because people are frustrated. We don't have any park, literally, but you've got a whole bunch of soccer fields right across the street that we can't use. Was a complaint, so that's got its perils too. If you want people to be irritated, just kind of wave that in front of them and then say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you can't come." It doesn't go over particularly well. And we have now got the dog park, and some stuff's being built in that area. But that was a lot of people to be saying, "Yeah, you're paying for all this, but you can't actually use it." Trailheads are fantastic. Obviously, very proud of that. I've done some of those dedications up there, and they're beautiful areas. But realistically, that doesn't necessarily substitute, these are not equivalent things in terms of probably usage and, what people probably want. I would say, I'll wrap up because I know you guys probably have other meetings. As a citizen, if I was a young person with a family or something, my expectation might be, there's going to be a park and a library kind of close by. Somewhere within a couple miles. I'm not going to have to drive like a million miles. I'm not going to have to drive from Tatum Ranch to like Northern to find, something. I don't know I'd necessarily think, there should be a tennis court, there should be this, but there should be some jungle gyms. I went to stuff like that as a kid. Yeah, somewhere, there are areas that don't have that. And I think that's a shame. And that's something that I'm trying to address. All these things are not equivalent things. There is a disparity in almost every single, really every single category except trailheads, and it's pretty glaring. So I'm glad I asked us to go through this exercise. I appreciate Michael weighing in. I'm happy to have further discussions, or certainly, this isn't to try to raid resources from one area of town and move it to another, but I do think people have noticed the disparity, and I've noticed it too, and now that we've seen the numbers, it's pretty irrefutable. So again, it's not anybody's specific fault, it's the way the city's developed, and then a downturn cashiered a bunch of projects. I don't know that the appropriate response is to say, well, they could put in 2/3 of the money or something to pay for their own park, when the other parks, the other neighborhoods didn't have to do that, by and large, for decades. So, any more? Yes, Michael?
Vice Mayor, I like this report, but it's just so broad. Maybe we can have 3 or 4 different meetings or future agenda items where you can focus maybe what's the whole concept of a district park, maybe the community park, and why we had so many community parks maybe in the central area, and if there's a need for those still or not, and the usage, and maybe give us some kind of numbers and data and stuff to see, so we can actually understand a little bit better, and actually people that are watching can actually understand it. And and like the community centers, how many of those are actually being ran by the city of Phoenix, and how many of those are actually nonprofits, so then we can get a clearer picture. Because when you look at this, we've got 27 community centers, and I know that people living out in the Estrella Mountain, Levine, and also in northern parts of Phoenix are going to say, well, we don't have one of these, what's going on? So I mean, it's a clear understanding that yes, we built this, and maybe the reason was why we built it back in the 40s, or back in the 50s or whatever, and getting a clear picture, and maybe even the swimming pools, and what are some of the trends. I know that my kids love to go to splash pads, and if that is that more affordable to do for the city of Phoenix, and it's a trend that people like now. They don't have to worry about their kids drowning or keeping an eye on them. They can just run around, and so maybe look at what are some of the best practices of other cities that are out there, and maybe we can break this down and have more of an in-depth conversation or so, right?
I appreciate that very much. I appreciate the interest, and we can definitely do that. My office will work with yours to see, kind of specifically, or just wander over and we can sit down with Inger and kind of explain. I do think it's a discussion worth having, and I appreciate the spirit of that suggestion. And just so you know, Northern, I just kind of ballparked it. I sort of knew where district boundaries were. I'm like, population-wise, what seemed kind of fair to me as a northern boundary. Camelback seemed too far south. And we were also trying to keep it simple. One concern the staff had, I can see why. But I said, nope, throw it all on there. Let's try to sort it out. But also with the breakdown, we're trying to make it a little simpler. So, but yes, there's certainly more in-depth discussion. Certainly, I think is warranted. But if you guys are willing to have it, because I don't want to be disrespectful of your time. Okay, thank you. So maybe we can follow up with
Absolutely.
Michael's office.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, call to the public. None. Okay. Future agenda items. I think Councilman Nowakowski just suggested some. Any other future agenda items? No? All right. Meeting adjourned. I appreciate you guys coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. That was nice.